We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Amud Beis Meseches Makkos. This is Makkos Daf 14b. This daf is sponsored by David Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, see the description box below, and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that according to Rabbi Yitzchak, kares da'achoso, the fact that it specifies kares by one's sister, even though kares is true by all arayos, that teaches us that it's only kares that the person receives and not malchus. That's how Rabbi Yitzchak learns that there is no malchus by chayve krisus. Now the other Tanoim, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel, they hold that there is malchus by chayve krisus. So the question is, what do they do with kares da'achoso? And the Gemara said in the previous Amud that they use kares da'achoso to teach that, let's say a person is with his sister who also happens to be his father's sister, who also happens to be his mother's sister, that is going to be three separate chiyuvin. That's what the Rabbanan, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel, are referred to as the Rabbanan. That's what the Rabbanan do with kares da'achoso. The Gemara then asked, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, where does he learn that out? And the Gemara said he learns that out from achoso de seifa. It says achoso at the end of the pasuk over there. And the Gemara said, what do the Rabbanan do from achoso de seifa, from the achoso at the end of the pasuk? And the Gemara said that the Rabbanan, they use achoso de seifa to teach that a person is chayiv not only for a half sister, meaning a sister from the father's side or the mother's side, but even for a full sister. And so the question is, where does Rabbi Yitzchak learn full sister? And the Gemara now says, me achoso de reisha. Rabbi Yitzchak learns the full sister from the achoso in the beginning of the pasuk. Rashi says, me achoso de reisha dematzi lemechtav kikach es basaviv o basimo, because it could have just written basaviv basimo. It didn't need to say achoso, and so therefore he learns full sister from over there, that there's liability for that. And the Gemara continues, v'idach, and what about the other opinion, meaning the Rabbanan? What do they do with achoso dereisha? Hahumi boile lechale kares lemefatim ulasach. They need that to say, to divide the kares up by mefatim and sach. Again, mefatim is somebody who creates the shemen hamishcha, and sach is somebody who anoints themselves with the shemen hamishcha. And Rashi explains, l'mefatim v'sach, again, somebody who blends the shemen hamishcha and somebody who anoints with the shemen hamishcha. The havanami shnei lavin v'kares echa. There also, it's two lavin, but kares is mentioned only once. So we need to divide and say that, again, if a person would do both of them, let's say in one lapse of awareness, that he's chayiv too. It's just like we need that same kind of division by arayas. If there's one lapse of awareness for multiple arayas, you have to bring a carbon for each. So if we can't apply the achoso dereisha over here by arayas, we'll apply it over here to mefatim and sach. V'idach, in the other opinion, meaning Rabbi Yitzchak, how does he know to divide mefatim and sach? Savar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Hoshia, he holds, like Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Hoshia says, the Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Hoshia, because Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Hoshia says, Kol makom shata motzi shnei lavin v'kares echad, anytime you find two separate lavin, two separate negative commandments in one kares, chilukin hein lekarbon, they are divided when it comes to carbon, and that's how he knows by mefatim and sach that there are two different karbanos. And the Gemara continues, v'iba same, if you want, I could say, lo savar lak Rabbi Elazar, that actually Rabbi Yitzchak does not hold like Rabbi Elazar, and so again, where does he learn lechale kares lemefatim v'sach v'nafka le, and he learns it from the following, miv asher yishkav es isha dov, it says that a person, he lays with a woman who is flowing, and we will see Rashi in a moment, v'idach, and the other opinions, meaning again the Rabbanan, hahumi boy lechid Rabbi Yochanan, what are they going to do with the pasuk of v'ish asher yishkav es isha dova? They use it for the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan. The Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, because Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, minayin she'ein ha'isha tameya sheyotza mad v'derech ervasa. How do we know that a woman is only tummy when the flow comes by way of her erva? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, v'isha asher yishkav es isha dava v'gila es ervasa v'gomer. Again, it says a person is with a woman who is menstruating. Melamed she'ein ha'isha tameya at sheyotza mad v'derech ervasa. This teaches that a woman is not tamei until the flow comes by way of her erva. And Rashi explains, again, according to the Rabbanan, the achoso dereisha is l'chale kares by mefatim and sach. V'idach, and the other opinion, meaning Rabbi Yitzchak, savar like Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Hoshia, he holds like Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Hoshia. V'iba is same, if you want, I could say nafka le mi v'isha asher yishkav es isha dava, or he learns it out from v'isha asher yishkav es isha dava. Again, those are the possible sources of l'chale by mefatim and sach. And v'idach, and finally the Gemara said, according to the Rabbanan, nahumi boy le, again, that pasuk, the pasuk that was brought of Isha Asher Yishkav Es Isha Dava, that teaches that Ein Ho Isha Tameya Ad Sheyotza Mad V'derech Arvasa. And Rashi explains, Vachi Perusha, this is the explanation, V'idach Srir Like Rabbi Elazar, the other one, meaning Rabbi Yitzchak, holds like Rabbi Elazar, D'Amar Allah Shahalavin Mechalken L'chatos, V'yam Mefatim V'sach Amrin Meseches Krisos. Again, according to Rabbi Elazar, anytime you have two lavin and one kares, they're chalukin l'karbon, and we say by Mefatim and Sach in Meseches Krisos, Shein Shnei lavin, it's two lavin, Abasar Adam Lo Yisach V'maskunto Lo Tasu Kamo, with those those are the two lavin. You can't anoint it on the flesh of a person, and also you can't create it. You can't mix something similar to it. The kares achas, and there's one kares written over there. Ish asher yirkach kamo v'asher yitein mimenu. It says there's going to be kares. So chiluk chatos beineim. So there's a division of chatos. You're going to get two carbon chatoses. Shalavin mechalkin lechatos. That again, the fact that there's two negative commandments divides up when it comes to chatos. The kevan da'asu lahachi. Now says Rashi, once we understand this idea, if we're following Rebbe Lozer, that if you have two lavin and one kares, that automatically divides. So then it actually turns out that ba'arayos nami lo boy chiluk. So it turns out by arayos also you don't need anything special to say that there's a chiluk, that you divide and give multiple karbanos. V'lo mitzdarech leila midrash al isha de le'el. You won't actually need the pasuk of el isha that we used earlier on the previous summit. Vayaser le'ikar kra dekares ba'achos laduna b'kares v'lo b'malchus. And the main part of that pasuk is just going to teach us again what Rabbi Yitzchak said, that the fact that kares is specified by achoso tells us that there's kares and no malchus. And Rashi continues and says, v'achoso the seifa, the achoso at the end of the pasuk, that's l'chayvo al achoso shi achosave v'achosimo. That's to say he's chayiv 3 when it comes to his sister, who also happens to be the sister of his father and the sister of his mother. V'achoso the reish and the achoso at the beginning of the pasuk, l'chayvo al achoso ba'asave v'basimo. That's mechayiv him on his full sister, lomar shein onshin minadin, to say that we don't punish from a kal v'chomer. And Rashi continues, but then the Gemara said another answer, Inami lo savar lalad Rebbe Lozer, or we can say that Rebbe Yitzchak does not hold of Rebbe Lozer that any time you have two lavin and one kares, that it's chaluk and the carbon. But nafkale chiluk ba'arayas, but he can learn out the concept of chiluk ba'arayas, that you bring multiple karbonos, min v'isha shar yishkav es isha dava, again from the pasuk of v'isha shar yishkav es isha dava, techsiv bei kares yisera, there's an extra kares written there, lomer shachayavon olad li'atzma, to say that there's an independent chiyuv, umimena tilman kol haklal, and there we can learn the entire rule. And Rashi says, "V'meino inyan lagufa." Now, if we don't even really need it when it comes to arayas, because we already know chiluk by arayas, ta'nafkalon mi ve'elisha, because we already learned that out from ve'elisha. That's the same ve'elisha that Rashi mentioned above when Rashi said lo mitzdarich leila midrash alisha. If you follow the first approach, that any time there are two lavin and one kares, that we're going to say they're separate chiyuvin, you don't even need that elisha. But in the second approach, we actually can use elisha, and we can say imeino inyan. V'meino inyan lagufa. If this pasuk over here of isha shar yishkav es isha dav is not really needed, because we learn out from vel isha l'chalik al kol isha, to divide by every single woman. That's what we said on the previous Amud. So then tenei inyan l'shar shnei lavin v'kares achas kigon mefatem mesach. We can apply it to other situations where you have two lavin and one kares, like mefatem mesach. Again, that there will be separate chiyuvim. And Rashi continues, sheyatza madva derech ervasa. Again, the flow, the blood has to come derech ervasa, by the way of her erva, le'afuke derech dofen delo. For example, to exclude, let's say it came through her stomach, that would not count in terms of making her tameh with tomas nida. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'tameh sha'achal as hakodesh." If a person is tameh and he eats kodesh, so he's liable to receive malchus. And the Gemara says, "B'shloma habola mikdash tameh." I understand if somebody enters the Beis Hamikdash and he's tameh, ksiv onesh u'ksiv asara. There's a punishment written in the Torah, and there's also a warning written in the Torah. Onesh, the punishment, ksiv, because it's written as Mishkan Hashem Timei v'nichrasa. It says that the punishment is kares. And Azhar, it also is mentioned the warning, v'lo yitamu es machaneim. It says they shouldn't be metamei their camps. Elatameh sha'achal es hakodesh, but somebody who's tameh who eats something that is kodesh. B'shloma onesh ksiv. I understand it's written the punishment. The punishment, it says in the pasuk, "V'hanefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlamim asher la'Hashem v'tumaso olav v'nichrasa." It says kares in such a situation by a tameh, by somebody who's tameh v'tumaso olav, who eats kodesh. El azhara minayin. But when it comes to the warning, where do we have a warning for a tameh sha'achal es hakodesh? And the Gemara continues and answers, Reish Lakish Omer, Reish Lakish says, B'chol kodesh lo siga. It says that you can't touch kodesh, and Reish Lakish understands that to mean that you can't eat kodesh. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Rabbi Yochanan says, Tani bardala taught, asya tumaso. It comes from Gzeira Shava, the word tumaso. Ksiv hacha, it's written over here, v'tumaso olav. Again, it says v'tumaso olav v'nichrasa, that he's tameh, and the punishment is kares. Again, that was the punishment pasuk which we quoted above. Uchsiv hasam, and it's written over there, tameh yiyah od tumaso bo. It says he is tameh, and the tumah is still with him. And malahalan, just like over there, onesh v'azhara, there's a punishment and also a warning. Afkan, so too over here, onesh v'azhara, there's a punishment and also a warning. And Rashi says, Mi b'chol kodesh lo siga. Again, Reish Lakish learns it from the pasuk of b'chol kodesh lo siga. V'darshinan leila kamon azhar lo'ocha. We're going to darshan later on. That's a warning for one who eats. And Tani Bardala taught Shem Chacham. Bardala is the name of a Chacham, a Talmud Chacham. Chsiv v'tumaso olav. It's written v'tumaso olav. B'tamei shachal es kodesh. Again, by a tamei who eats kodesh, it says v'tumaso olav. That's written by the punishment. Uchsiv od tumaso bo bevo el hamikdash tamei. And then it also says that kind of language by somebody who comes to the Beis Hamikdash tamei. And we learn just like over there, there's a punishment and an azhara. So too over here, there's a punishment and an azhara. And the Gemara continues, B'shlam Reish Lakish lo amar Rabbi Yochanan. I understand why Reish Lakish doesn't say like Rabbi Yochanan, because Gzeira Shava lo Gomer, because he didn't have a tradition of that particular Gzeira Shava that Rabbi Yochanan had. El Rabbi Yochanan, my time lo amar Reish Lakish. Why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say like Reish Lakish? Why doesn't he learn from B'chol Kodesh lo Siga, a warning for a situation of a tamei that eats Kodesh? And the Gemara says, Amar Lach, he will say to you, Hahu azhar l'truma. That's actually a warning for truma. It is not referring to Kodesh. And the Gemara continues, Reish Lakish azhara l'truma minale. And where does Reish Lakish get the warning for truma? Nafkale me ish mizera aron vutzarua uzav. He learns it from the pasuk of ish. The full pasuk over here is ish mizera aron vutzarua uzav, talking about someone with tzaras or he's azav. Bakodashim lo yochel. It says he shouldn't eat kodshim ad asher yitar, until he becomes pure. And so we learn from there that's actually a reference to the person who's tamei. He shouldn't eat truma. As the Gemara continues and explains, Ezehu davar shu shava bezara shel Aaron. What is something which is shava for the children of Aaron, for all of the children of Aaron? Haviyomer zu truma. That's referring to truma. That's why this pasuk is a reference to truma. Rashi says Gezerah shava lo gomer. Again, Reish Lakish didn't have a tradition of that Gezerah shava velo lamda me rabbo. He didn't learn it from his rebbe. And what is shava bezara shel Aaron? It means ba'anoshim uvenashim. Truma is something that is given to the children of Aaron, whether it's men or women. Avol kachim. But if we're talking about kachim, necholin el lezucharim, that's only eaten by the males. And the Gemara continues and explains, V'idach, and what about the other opinion, meaning according to Rabbi Yochanan, what does he do with ish mizera Aaron? Isn't that the warning for truma? And the Gemara says there's actually two warnings, Hahula achila v'hala negia, because you have one pasuk, this pasuk of ish mizera Aaron, it's talking about eating the truma when a person is tamei, and the other pasuk, the pasuk above which Reish Lakish used, again that's the pasuk of b'chol kodesh lo siga, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that's actually talking about truma, and that's talking about negia, that's talking about touching the truma. Reish Lakish and Reish Lakish, hai b'chol kodesh lo siga, lahachi hu da'asa. Does the pasuk of B'chol Kodesh Lo Siga, according to Reish Lakish, is that really for somebody who's tamei who eats Kodesh? Hahumi boile l'tamei shenaga b'Kodesh. Isn't that needed for a tamei, for someone who's tamei who touches Kodesh? The Itmar, because it was stated tamei shenaga b'Kodesh. If a tamei person touches Kodesh, Reish Lakish Omer Loka. Reish Lakish says that the punishment is Malchus, and Rabbi Yochanan Omer Eino Loka. Rabbi Yochanan says in such a situation one doesn't get Malchus. Reish Lakish Omer Loka. Reish Lakish says there's Malchus because of the pasuk of B'chol Kodesh Lo Siga. It says B'chol Kodesh Lo Siga. That's exactly what the pasuk is saying. A person is not allowed to touch Kodesh when he is tamei. And Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Rabbi Yochanan says Ein Loka, that the person doesn't get Malchus, because Ahu Azhar L'Truma Hu Dasa, because that's actually a warning with regards to Truma. And Rashi explains, Hahu Azar L'Truma, again, that pasuk, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is a warning for Truma, meaning L'Negias Truma, meaning in terms of touching Truma. That's what Rabbi Yochanan learns from this pasuk. And the Gemara continues and answers on behalf of Reish Lakish, Tamei Shenaga B'Kodesh, the warning against a person who's Tamei touching Kodesh, that's Mida'afke Rachmana B'Lashon Negia. That's because the Torah uses a language of Negia, a language of touching. And the Gemara continues, V'Azhara La'ochel, and in terms of the warning for somebody who's Tamei who eats Kodesh, that's because Iskish Kodesh Mikdash. That's because there's a comparison between Kodesh and Mikdash. And Rashi explains, Tamei Shenaga B'Kodesh Teirutzuhu D'Metaretz Reish Lakish. This is an answer on behalf of Reish Lakish that Reish Lakish is giving. Mide Iskish Kodesh LaMikdash. It's from the fact that there's a comparison between Kodesh and Mikdash, meaning B'Haikra, in this pasuk, it says B'chol Kodesh Lo Siga. It says you can't touch Kodesh, which again, that language of touching, that's a warning against the Tamei person touching Kodesh. Ve'la Mikdash Lo Savo, and then it says he can't enter the Mikdash. V'Darshina L'Kamon, we're going to darshan later on, Ma Mikdash Yesh Ba'azaraso Netilas Neshama She'abba La Mikdash Tamei B'Kares. Just like by entering the Mikdash, there's a punishment of Kares. Af Azhar as Kodesh. So too, when we're talking about warning by Kodesh, Davar Sheyesh Bo Netilas Neshama, it must be something where the punishment is Netilas Neshama, is taking the person's life. V'hainu Achila, that has to be referring to Achila, eating. She'ana Shalei Kares, where there's a punishment of Kares. De'ilu B'Negio like a Kares, because just touching the Kodesh when you're Tamei, there is no Kares in that case. But the Gemara continues and asks, "Va'akati lahachi udasa," but still, is that really what the pasuk is for? Hahumi boile l'tamei sha'achal b'sar kodesh lefnei zrikas damim. Isn't that needed for somebody who is tamei who eats the meat of kodesh before the zrikas damim, before the sprinkling of the blood? The itmar, because it was stated, tamei sha'achal b'sar kodesh lefnei zrikas damim. Let's say someone's tamei, he eats the b'sar kodesh, the meat of kodesh, before the sprinkling of the blood. Reish Lakish Omer Loka. Reish Lakish says there's malchus in that case, and Rabbi Yochanan Omer Eino Loka. Rabbi Yochanan says there's no malchus in that case. And the Gemara explains, Reish Lakish Omer Loka. Reish Lakish says there's malchus in that case. Bechol kodesh lo siga. It says bechol kodesh lo siga. Loshna lifnei zrika v'loshna liachar zrika. It doesn't matter if it's before the sprinkling of the blood. It doesn't matter if it's after the sprinkling of the blood. And Rabbi Yochanan Omer Eino Loka. Rabbi Yochanan says there is no malchus in that case, because Rabbi Yochanan l'taim, Rabbi Yochanan follows his opinion. Diyamar, because he said Diyamar Kra, because the pasuk says tumaso tumaso. It says that there's a gezerah shava tumaso. Again, that was the source according to Rabbi Yochanan. V'chi ksiv tumaso la'achar zrika hu dechsiv. And when does it say tumaso? It says that la'achar zrika, so it only applies after the sprinkling of the blood. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Yochanan l'taimi, Rabbi Yochanan follows his opinion, Diyamar azhar la'ochel kodesh betumaso, because what did Rabbi Yochanan say above? Where do we find the warning, somebody who eats kodesh when he's tamei? Nafka mi tumaso. Tumaso, we said, that was learned from a gezerah shav of tumaso. V'ahu v'tumaso, all of dechsib ba'onesh, the kodesh, la'achar zrikahu. And that tumaso that it says by the punishment of kodesh, that's la'achar zrika, that's after the sprinkling of the blood. The Tanya b'Toras Kohanim, because there's a bryce in Toras Kohanim, u'maisin la b'menachos, it's brought in menachos, beperek shlishi, in the third perek, yachal yu chayav all of misham tuma, kodem zrika. I might think there's a chiyav because of tuma before the zrika. Talmud Lomer kol Torah yochal basar v'nefesh asher tochal basar hanitor l'tahorim chayav all of misham tuma. Only that which is already permitted, meaning after the sprinkling of the blood, there's a chiyav if the person is tamei. She'ein nitor l'tahorim, but if it wasn't mutter for those who are pure, ein chayav all of misham tuma. At that point in time, there is no liability in terms of tuma. And the Gemara continues and answers on behalf of Reish Lakish, Hahimi b'chol kodesh nafka. That is actually learned out from b'chol kodesh, and Rashi explains, Hahimi b'chol mi ribuya de v'chol, because it says all, that's an inclusion, Darish Reish Lakish, and that's where Reish Lakish actually darshans af lifnei zrika, even before zrika, and so that's why b'chol kodesh lo siga is really can be used for the azhara, for a tamei that eats kodesh. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Kavasi de Reish Lakish. We have a brisa that supports Reish Lakish. Again, the pasuk says, B'chol kodesh lo siga. It says you can't touch kodesh. And Reish Lakish understands that azhara la'ochel. Again, that's a warning for someone who's tamei who eats kodesh. Ata omer azhara la'ochel. You're saying it's a warning for eating. Oeno ela azhara la'nogeya. Maybe it's actually just a warning for touching. Talmud Lomer b'chol kodesh lo siga v'yala mikdash. It says b'chol kodesh lo siga, and then it says you can't enter the mikdash. And as we said above, makish kodesh la mikdash. That's a comparison between kodesh and mikdash. Mikdash davar sheyesh bo netilas neshama. Just like by coming into the Beis HaMikdash tamei, it's netilas neshama. There's a punishment of the taking of one's life, of kares. Af kol davar sheyesh bo netilas neshama. So too over here, when it says bechol kodesh lo siga, it must be referring to something where there's netilas neshama. Ve'ibn again, if it was just simply someone who's tamei who touched the kodesh, mi'iko netilas neshama, would there really be such a severe punishment of netilas neshama, of taking the life of kares? Ella rather, no, it must be ba'achila, must be eating. And again, that's like Reish Lakish says, that pasuk of b'chol kodesh lo siga is a warning against a tamei person eating kodesh. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba bar bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol los aseh shekidmo aseh, any los aseh that is preceded by an aseh, loken olav, there is malchus in that case. And Rashi explains, Kol los aseh shekidmo aseh loken olav, anytime you have a los aseh which is preceded by an aseh, there is malchus. Rashi says, Ha'asal ashmin, and this is teaching us, Da'afilu l'man damar lav hanitak l'aseh in loken olav. Even according to the one who says that by a lav hanitak l'aseh there is no malchus, that's when you have a negative commandment, but then if you violate the negative commandment, there's an aseh to do afterwards to fix it, and so you don't get malchus. Kidatani, as we learned in a brayso, lo so siru v'hanosar tisrufu, you can't leave over, and if you leave over, that which you leave over you burn. That's the aseh that fixes the los aseh. Ba'akos of litan aseh achar los aseh, the pasuk gives an aseh after the los aseh, lomar she'ein loken olav, to say that there is no malchus over here for this los aseh. Shenitak hakosav eso aseh lios onsho shalav. Essentially, the aseh is like the punishment of the lav. V'tikuno, it's like the way to fix the lav. Lomar, as if to say, los aseh kach, don't do such and such. V'yimasisa aseh zos v'yipatrid. If you do that, then you should do the following, and then you'll be exempt. V'yashminan Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan is teaching us hani mili be'aseh haba achar halav. That's all true by an asay that follows the lav. She'ena toyachol lekaymo elo liachar averes halav, meaning an asay that you can't fulfill unless you've transgressed the lav. Aval asay shekidem es halav, but let's say the asay comes before the lav. V'yatoyachol lekaymo kodem averes halav, you'd be able to fulfill the asay before transgressing the lav. Ein ze nituk halav, that's not considered nituk to the lav. Ve'afilo tekaymenu achar averes halav, even if you would fulfill that asay after transgressing the lav, lo niftartum min malchus, you're not going to be exempt from malchus. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph.